Welcome to Psychology to Live By. Today is a Q&A with some really equanimous people. Our topic is you get what you resist. And our very accepting participants have watched the podcast of that name. And you can see or listen to this at my website, drchris.life. But I'll do a quick summary now before we jump into our Q&A. So here's an extremely common and consequential psychological bugbear, that we tend to get what we resist. If we resist things in ourselves or in others, often what we get is more resistance and more of the very thing we are resisting. No doubt it's partly because we pay vigilant attention for any evidence of the undesired thing and overinterpret even the subtlest of signs. At its most ubiquitous, if we try not to think of something, it usually backfires, as in, try not to think of a pink elephant. And we frequently bind others to their worries by proffering well-meaning advice, saying things like, try not to think about it, or don't worry about it. Let's look at a few examples. It has often been observed that a person's stutter becomes more pronounced the more they try not to stutter. By contrast, for many people, the stutter disappears when they cannot hear themselves speaking. And this has been demonstrated experimentally when you place headphones on the person with quite loud music and then the stutter disappears. Or on the golf course, a player can get the yips, the sudden and unexplained loss of ability to execute well-honed skills. Now, as the person worries about messing up their performance, they're actually much more likely to mess it up. They get what they resist. Jealousy can have a very similar trajectory. One can create a self-fulfilling prophecy. Our suspicion of infidelity by our partner, where none exists, promotes our negative behaviours towards them. And over time, the possibility of a new relationship becomes much more attractive to them. And for those who suffer panic attacks, the hypervigilance to any impending panic, of course, turns even positive arousal into a feared loss of control and a descent into the whirlpool of hyperarousal and terror. Now, I hasten to add, this is definitely not the so-called law of attraction. We are not manifesting physical reality with our minds. No, understood pragmatically, this is the way our thinking changes our behaviour and thereby has effects in the world. The cure to resistance is acceptance and attention shifting in that order. In an apparently paradoxical way, the more we accept ourselves, our abilities and the nature of the world, the more likely we are to navigate it with grace and effectiveness. And then the more likely we can shift attention to more salutary objects and actions. For example, we know that for chronic pain sufferers, mindfulness practices based on acceptance, equanimity, and close attention to the sensations of pain dramatically reduces their subjective suffering from the pain, and they can then focus more on life and things other than the pain. Likewise, tinnitus sufferers often report a positive turning point when they come to accept the noise in their head. It doesn't go away, but their suffering diminishes. There's also something very attractive about a person who really accepts themselves as they are. They are comfortable people to be around and easy to relax with. Likewise, we love people who accept us the way we are. They also then become more attractive. At the broadest psychological level, acceptance allows us to see reality objectively and thereby take more realistic steps to deal well with it. So we should work with the realities that we're tempted to resist. As in the martial art Aikido, we align ourselves with the offensive reality and utilize it towards more useful ends. So don't waste energy resisting. Find ways to go more with the flow. Alrighty, so that's by way of a bit of a summary of the workshop. And here we are with my equanimous colleagues and friends. Not sure whether you've ever been called equanimous before.
I'm going to have to Google that, because when it's said with an Aussie accent, I'm not quite too sure what I'm actually hearing. Was it iguananess?
No, equanimous, as in equanimity.
Equanimity, okay.
Yeah. So, again, always interested, curious about your responses to the podcast. Who would like to share their thoughts and questions first? Who might that be?
Well, for me, instantly this one parenting came up to me, and I'm like, okay, how can I harness this to get what I want from my children? So yeah, how can I harness this to get what I want? I'm just going with them. It's like
can we?
I think on myself that I constantly am resisting, I think, with them and it's creating my own drama. But so like by maybe being more accepting of the mounting pile of dishes in the sink, that I'm going to create equanimity for myself. So that's just kind of where my mind was going in listening to this one.
Beautiful. So the way you first framed it, I think we need to dial down your ambition somewhat.
Damn it.
If we can accept that you might get less of what you don't want, rather than get what you want, I think that's really going to be where we're going to focus.
Perfect.
But I think there's an intuitive sense that people get this, that when we resist, I remember my poor departed mother. She was quite, shall I say, talkative, and on phone conversations with her, I'd sometimes get impatient, and I'd resist, sort of trying to get off the call. Do you think she could sense me trying to get off the call and thereby extend the calls? And at some point, I woke up to myself, and after all, I'm a psychologist and should understand some of these things. And I realised that I needed to go with the flow a bit, And actually, my mum was a very interesting woman. I just needed to take more responsibility to direct the conversation to things that we mutually enjoyed. Right. So I think with kids, if we can, my wife was very good at this. I don't know how she, where she got it from, but she was very good at redirecting their attention. And if you think about it at the personal level, the idea is we accept what is there and then we redirect our own attention to something more useful, right? But if we're really upset and we're resisting, it's very, very hard to do that. So I think if you can acknowledge that they're worried about something or they want something, and then just sort of, my wife used to do it with a quite sort of happy demeanour, even though the kids were upset, and just be shifting and say, oh, look at this. It's a sort of what I like to call the shiny thing phenomenon. Oh, look, shiny thing. Yeah. And so I think that's the way, but, there's no real, parenting's the toughest job in the universe.
Is it ever? Yeah. Yeah.
You want to have some fun with it?
Of course.
Yeah, but you
push, and then at the last minute change it. The shock on their face is worth it.
It's worth it.
But
that's sometimes like what I do. I'm like,
do you want to explain that, Terry?
Well, they're in that they would rather be right than anything else. So I'm like, I pushed and pushed and pushed, not unlike the dishes. Like, well, if you don't finish dinner, you're not going to have dessert. oh, shouldn't you sit down and finish your like dinner? I'm going to turn the TV off. It goes down this whole thing. And that's like, oh, why don't you sit on the couch, watch TV, do what you want, and I'll hand you your like dinner. Jen wants to kill me.
Yes.
But the end result is dinner gets in and the kids are happy and they go to bed in a pretty good frame of mind and they're not up at 2-3 in the morning because they've had a nightmare. So I don't know. I'm kind of with you, Karen, because you're not going to win.
I'm not going to win. Only my resistance is creating the drama for me. So just accept it.
Well, or have some fun with it.
Have some fun with it. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm not
right,
the psychologist here, but I like having fun with it now. Second time around, I'm having fun.
The fun is the flow. There you go.
Yeah, and I think it's a sort of an experimental attitude. I'll try this. Oh, now I'll try that. And you don't have to be a psychologist, as I put it, to play with other people's minds. And I encourage other people to do it, like in that sort of light-hearted, charitable way. You're not trying to hurt people or manipulate them, but it's sort of playful. The other thing that occurs to me with kids, and I was hopeless the first time round, Terry, so I haven't had a second time round, but is you give them options, all of which you're happy with. So you say, well, you can do this or that or that.
You think they don't sense that?
Of course they do, but it still kind of works a bit.
You've never dealt with girls.
No, look, that's why I said, that's why I qualified it, Terry. It is, sometimes they're going to be digging their heels in, and it'll. Yeah. Well,
boys, you can get away with that. Girls, they got this sense.
You know what? I don't know empirically whether there is that division in between boys and girls, but I do think that sometimes kids need to hold their ground, and we don't want to squash that out of them, right? So this is a devilish question about how we find the balance. But I think most of the time, you're going to see if you can redirect their attention. Occasionally, you're just not going to give them what they want, and they're going to be really unhappy, and they've got to go to their room or something, But other times, I think we should allow them to feel their influence on the world. But it's going to depend on a lot of factors, including their personalities and ours and the situations and so on. So that's enough down that rabbit hole. Who's next?
I can go down a different rabbit hole, but
yep.
My husband suffers from tinnitus, and I think it's really, you have to accept it, I guess. It's a form of cognitive therapy. But I'm always amazed at how he can handle it, because I think it could be debilitating.
Exactly. And do you know if he's gone through a kind of process with it, that he's moved towards more acceptance and equanimity?
I think so. I mean, I will ask him, but he seems to handle it, and it certainly hasn't gone away. So I think that he hasn't had any significant therapy, but he's managed to adjust to it. So I would imagine, I think he's just accepted it.
Yeah. Yeah, so because my wife is a tinnitus sufferer, and I remember there was a period early in our marriage where it was really getting to her, and I think a big part of it was she was worried, it's getting worse, and what if it gets even worse again? And then she projected into the future, I'm always going to have this, and I'm always going to suffer from it. You will recognize some of the 3 Ps from the optimism, pessimism here, And I don't know how she managed it, maybe like your husband, Colleen. But she obviously got to a point where it's not going away, and I need to change my relationship with it.
And you can see how it would be like a form of anxiety in a way. You really have to
Yeah.
change the way you think. Change.
Yeah. I mean, the mindfulness, I mean, it is a kind of mindfulness, right? If we think about what mindfulness is, it's this capacity to be with reality the way it is, not try to change it, and accept it. And, you know, I mentioned, I think, in the summary about chronic pain sufferers. And it's really remarkable. These are very, very, you know, well documented and researched areas, you know, that it's not just that they're less upset by the pain, you know, and that sort of psychological reaction. It also does appear that, objectively speaking, they feel less pain. Now, nothing is necessarily changed in their medical condition, right? So there's a lot for us to learn about the relationship between the way we think and the way our whole nervous system, you know, mediates experience, right? But there's no doubt that by practicing mindfulness techniques, the chronic pain sufferers, they certainly don't have the psychological angst or the degree of psychological angst, but they also does appear they don't have quite the levels of the physical pain. And, you know, I'm not an expert in this space, but I know there's a lot of research into that because obviously that's extraordinary. I mean, it may, in some ways, I don't know, in some ways it might also link to things like the placebo effect.
Yeah.
Because there's another example where nothing has changed objectively, but the mind in believing something, you know, it can really give people, in fact, you know, when they produce pharmaceuticals, part of the criteria for them getting on, you know, approval is they've got to do better than the placebo effect, which is extraordinary. So there's the mind is an amazing thing. You know, it's obviously, you know, I wouldn't be much of a psychologist, I guess, if I didn't say that, would I?
Amazing.
Who's next?
So for me, this was actually more of a reminder that our behavior does not exist in a vacuum. And sometimes the frustrating behavior that we might perceive in others might actually be a reaction to the behavior that we are ourselves putting into the world. And there is a loop there that we have to, you know, often acknowledge and accept our own influence on the world. And sometimes that influence might manifest itself in ways that we don't expect or anticipate, but is nonetheless just as real.
Wow. Okay. So, yes, like if we step back and we say, you know, we get what we resist, right? So there are sort of, in interpersonal dynamics, there are sort of reciprocal loops, right? So there's a history. And what happens is both parties form a view. It's normally a righteous view. They've figured out what's wrong with the other person and they're not going to accept it. They're going to resist it, right? And as you say, Chris, that then elicits certain behaviours in us which they dislike and they resist. And it actually confirms some of their negative hypotheses about you. And that their further resistance to you further confirms your negative hypothesis about them. And so it can literally go forever.
Well, and it might also be subconscious. So not necessarily even directly aware of the way, you know, I might be influenced by how somebody else is behaving, but I am. And then I'm doing something and they're not necessarily cognitively aware of what I'm doing, how that's affecting them, but it is. And it just kind of keeps this loop that nobody's even necessarily objectively aware of.
not fully aware of it. It's at what we might call a low level of cognitive awareness. There's a whole lot of research at present around, how do we actually come to a feeling of rightness, or certainty about something, or indeed, how do we come to make decisions of any kind, right? And it's obvious that almost all of our decisions are made unconsciously. And almost all of our appraisals are necessarily at that sort of unconscious level, because consciousness, as marvelous as it is a limited capacity thing. And so what we become aware of in ourselves is already a conviction and a feeling, but we're not privy to all the reasons for that. We think we are, because we then rationalise why we strongly believe what we do. So yeah, you're right. Then you've got two people who are like that. It's a bloody miracle that we ever get things right. Like we can sort relationships out, but we can. And one of the mechanisms of getting relationships right is giving up a bit on who's right about the facts, and dropping back more to what are our values, what are we trying to do here, and then finding out why we have a different view of the same reality, and maybe finding common ground again, building the common ground on the value of our relationship rather than who's right about, whether the toilet seat should be up or down. Sorry about that example. Who have we got left? I've lost track. Oh, Terry, you sort of jumped in on the side of Karen's, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, because I could relate to all the kids' things, right? So
yeah, that's
I
right.
don't really have much more to add, really. I mean, it's so many rabbit holes to this one, right?
There is.
I've just learned to have a sense of humor to the fact that I've got two very strong-minded little girls in my life who always think that they're right. And the biggest battles happen when the 6-year-old goes off against the 9-year-old.
Exactly. But, there is this, sort of bouncing off that and Chris's question, there's this marvellous thing about the species, that although we have this very strong tendency, obviously we also seem to be able to, out of disagreement, out of resisting each other, we also are able to soften and accept and change our views.
The astonishing thing about kids is that they can be in complete tears and then laughing 3 seconds later. Adults, we take a little bit longer to do that. But kids, it's like 0 to 10 and 10 to 0.
Exactly. And again, that's another little rabbit hole about cognitive development, but which we probably won't go down today. But we do have this capacity to relax our resistance to each other. And I think it's because at some level, again, probably unconscious, we run cost-benefit analyses of what's the benefit of this. And ultimately, it's not worth the fight. What's more important is our relationship. When I got married, a friend of my mum's married as a priest, and he, and we're just about to do the ring, and he pulled a Swiftie on us. In front of everyone, he says, "Now, Chris and Mary, I'd like you to make a promise to each other. Will you do that?" And of course, we agreed without knowing what the promise was. And he said the promise is that whenever you fight, that you'll be the first to apologise. It was very wise, it took a while to figure out what it was about. But usually any damage a fight's doing to a relationship's far more important than the so-called content of what we might be fighting about. And I think human beings have an intuitive sense of that, and so it helps us interpersonally when we're resisting each other. All right, guys, you did not disappoint. There's obviously deep evidence of equanimity amongst you, and just want to thank you for listening to and watching the podcast, and I look forward to our next Q&A. Take care, guys. Bye.